Welcome back, intrepid explorers of history's underbelly, to the third chapter in our serialized odyssey through fascism's twisted path. If you've been with us from the start, you know we've journeyed from the primordial seeds planted in the 19th century, those early stirrings of nationalism and authoritarianism, to the explosive rise in the interwar period where figures like Mussolini and Hitler turned ideology into iron-fisted regimes. But now we stand at the precipice of fascism's global eruption. In this installment, we're diving into its wartime apex during World War II, tracing how it spread like wildfire across continents, mutating ideologically to adapt, conquer, and ultimately face its reckoning. Buckle up, because this is where the shadows deepen and the stakes skyrocket. Let's set the stage. By the late 1930s, fascism wasn't just an Italian or German phenomenon. It had become a hydra-headed beast, sprouting tentacles into Spain, Japan, and beyond. Picture this: Europe in 1939, teetering on the edge of catastrophe. Hitler's Nazi regime, fueled by a toxic brew of Aryan supremacy and expansionist dreams, signs the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Stalin's Soviet Union, a devil's bargain that carves up Poland. Then on September 1st, German tanks roll in, igniting World War II. But this wasn't just a war of borders, it was fascism's grand bid for world domination, mutating from national revivalism into a global ideology of conquest and extermination. First, let's explore its spread across Europe. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had already tested the waters with his invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, a brutal campaign that showcased fascism's imperial ambitions. Poison gas, aerial bombings, these were the tools of a regime that glorified violence. Mussolini's eyes then turned northward, aligning with Hitler in the Pact of Steel. Together, they envisioned a new order, a fascist-dominated Europe. Spain, under Francisco Franco, became a key ally after his victory in the Spanish Civil War, a conflict that served as a dress rehearsal for World War II. Franco's Falange Party blended Catholic conservatism with fascist authoritarianism. It wasn't pure Nazism, but a hybrid, less about racial purity, more about traditional hierarchy and anti-communism. This mutation allowed fascism to infiltrate diverse societies, adapting like a virus to local hosts. Now, shift your gaze eastward. Japan's militaristic regime, though not always labeled fascist in the strictest sense, shared its core DNA: ultranationalism, emperor worship, and expansionism. The 1931 invasion of Manchuria marked the beginning, evolving into the full-scale war with China by 1937. Atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands were slaughtered, echoed the barbarity of Nazi death squads. Japan's Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was a fascist mutation dressed in anti-colonial rhetoric, promising liberation from Western powers while imposing its own brutal domination. It spread fascism's influence across Asia, from occupied Korea to the Philippines, blending Shinto mysticism with militaristic control. But the true apex came during the war's height from 1940 to 1943. Hitler's blitzkrieg thundered through Western Europe. Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and France all fell like dominoes. Puppet regimes sprouted up, like Vichy France under Philippe Pétain, where fascism mutated into collaborationist conservatism, enforcing anti-Jewish laws and sending workers to German factories. In the Balkans, Croatia's Ustaše movement under Ante Pavelić took it to horrific extremes, blending Catholic nationalism with genocidal fervor against Serbs, Jews, and Roma. This wasn't just conquest, it was ideological warfare, where fascism adapted to local hatreds, amplifying them into state policy. Let's not forget the ideological mutations at the heart of this spread. Fascism started as a reaction to modernity, rejecting liberalism and socialism in favor of the mythic state. But wartime pressures forced it to evolve. In Germany, it fused with scientific racism, leading to the Holocaust, a systematic extermination machine that murdered 6 million Jews and millions more in concentration camps like Auschwitz. This was fascism's darkest mutation, turning pseudoscience into industrialized death. Even here, adaptations occurred. Propaganda films glorified the war effort, while economic policies shifted to total mobilization, conscripting entire populations into the fascist machine. Across the Atlantic, fascism's tendrils reached the Americas, though less overtly. In Argentina, Juan Perón drew inspiration from Mussolini, crafting Peronism as a populist variant,
strongman rule with social welfare to placate the masses. In the United States, isolationist groups like the German-American Bund echoed Nazi rhetoric, but democracy's safeguards limited their spread. Still, these echoes show how fascism mutated, infiltrating democracies under guises like America First isolationism. As the war raged, fascism's apex brought both triumphs and cracks. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, Operation Barbarossa, was Hitler's gamble for Lebensraum, or living space. Millions died in the frozen hell of Stalingrad, where the tide turned. Here we see another mutation: fascism's alliance of convenience. Hitler despised communism, yet his regime borrowed from Stalinist totalitarianism the secret police, the cult of personality, the relentless propaganda. But these adaptations couldn't mask the flaws. Overextension, resource shortages, and Allied resilience began to erode the Axis. By 1944, with D-Day and the Red Army's advance, fascism's global spread hit its wall. Mussolini was captured and executed. His body hung in Milan. Hitler, cornered in his bunker, took his own life as Berlin fell. The Nuremberg trials exposed the ideology's horrors, prosecuting war criminals and laying bare the mutations that enabled genocide. Yet suppression wasn't total. The seeds lingered, ready to sprout in post-war shadows. What drove this global spread? A perfect storm of economic despair, charismatic leaders promising revival, and a world weary of old orders. But its mutations, adapting to local cultures, blending with religion or militarism, made it resilient, a chameleon of tyranny. The human cost was immeasurable. Societies were scarred, yet lessons emerged: the fragility of democracy and the danger of unchecked nationalism. That catapults us toward our next installment: Post-War Echoes. We'll trace the ideology's revivals from 1945 onward, from underground movements in Europe to modern-day echoes in politics and culture. How did fascism survive its supposed death? What forms does it take now, sometimes hidden in plain sight? But before we move on, I want to hear from you. What part of this story do you want to see in more detail? Deeper dives into battles like Leningrad or the Pacific Theater, a look at cultural artifacts like Leni Riefenstahl's propaganda films, maybe interactive elements like timelines or maps? Let's collaborate. Your insights define where we go next. Share them in the comments. If this installment resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. Until then, keep questioning the past to shape a better future. Thanks for joining the journey.